9 minutes past 8 o'clock. It is Wednesday morning, the 23rd day of October, 2024. Good morning, everybody. I'm Scott Nicklin. Thanks for tuning in to KSJE 90.9 FM over the air right here in San Juan County, New Mexico. In Durango, Colorado, we broadcast at 103.3 FM. And if you're anywhere else on the planet, you can listen from our website, of course, ksje.com. Also want to welcome our viewers this morning. The video of the program is streaming out live to the KSJE Facebook page and also to our YouTube channel. So welcome aboard, everyone. So glad that you are with me this morning, because coming up in the next few moments, my conversation with U.S. Senator Ben Ray Lujan. He is here visiting Northwest New Mexico. He'll be talking about his visit and some other events, of course, that are in the news. That's coming up in the next few moments right here on KSJE this morning, so stay tuned for that. Then, of course, 8:50 a.m., we have a brand new segment for you on Wednesdays. That is our Musical Moments with Dr. Tone Fetz from right down the hall here at San Juan College. Dr. Fetz sharing some of his musical knowledge with us every Wednesday at 8:50 a.m. on KSJE, so stay tuned for that coming up this hour. Then, of course, we'll make way for Mick Hess, Roving with the Arts, our weekday classical music program, beginning at 9:06, and on Wednesdays, of course, a special 90-minute version of Roving with the Arts, so stay tuned for that, because that'll take us to 10:30, and right on Four Corners, our local and regional author program hosted by Del-Cherie Gladden. This week, Del-Cherie is talking with author Mary Kendall about her latest book, Bottled Secrets of Rosewood. You'll hear more about that today at 10:30 right here on KSJE, of course. Don't forget, we invite you to connect with us on X and Instagram in addition to Facebook and YouTube. And if you're a podcast person, we're adding new podcasts every day to the podcast platforms that you probably are already listening to podcasts with. So check it out, subscribe, and discover a new program that you may have missed on KSJE. Outside our studios here at San Juan College, it is a sunny Wednesday morning, 41 degrees at the moment. We're expecting a sunny day today with a high of 59 degrees in Farmington. Clear skies tonight with a low near 40. Tomorrow, sunshine with a bit warmer temperatures, the high 62 on Wednesday, 67 on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, with overnight lows, as you can see, mostly in the 40s. Back with my guest, Senator Lujan, right after this. KSJE is supported by San Juan Regional Medical Center. The caregivers of San Juan Regional Medical Center are committed to bettering the quality of life, health, and care of individuals, families, and our communities. Life is their sacred trust. Better is their mission. Here is their home. San Juan Regional Medical Center, improving the health of the Four Corners since 1910. Joining me here in the studio to talk about his visit to Northwest New Mexico and much, much more, U.S. Senator Ben Ray Lujan is here. Senator Lujan, it's nice to have you back at KSJE. Good evening.
Oh, Scott, it's always good to be with you. Thanks for having us in the studio today.
You bet. Thank you for coming over. And I guess we'll start with your trip to Farmington. And you're on recess, of course, and so you're traveling through the state. What brings you to Farmington today?
Well, we're visiting you just coming from Hickory Apache Nation, Scott, where we had a chance to visit with the council and the vice president, going over priorities in the community and in the region, talking about infrastructure, what more can be done in the community to work on health issues, working with local law enforcement as well. Great visit. It's always very humbling to be made incredibly warm whenever we visit with the leadership over at the Hickory Apache Nation. And we're here visiting with you now, and we'll be traveling actually into Shiprock in the morning and visiting with some constituents out in those communities as well, with the goal of making it to Gallup by the time the sun comes up the next day. We'll spend some time in Gallup on Tuesday afternoon and on Wednesday talking about healthcare issues predominantly. And that'll be the beginning of the week. So always fun to get a chance to get to northern Rio Arriba and then into San Juan County. But as you said, work period during the month of October as well. And next week I'll be out on the eastern side of New Mexico, and then also traveling down to Ruidoso with the devastation that we've all become familiar with from these rains that were not forgiving to so many communities, and especially our brothers and sisters down in Roswell and previously in Ruidoso with the fires. And it's always incredible to visit with those first responders and the incredible leadership. Yesterday, Mayor Jennings, the mayor of Roswell, was out directing traffic. You talk about all the responsibilities that leaders have, and it's just the kind of person that Tim is, to be out in the community and just helping so many people when they are in need as well. So looking forward to getting out to the eastern side of the state again next week. But beautiful weather out in the northwest, and a beautiful day here in Farmington today.
Very true, very true. It's certainly very different from the conditions in Roswell. Of course, they had some pretty severe flooding the past couple of days, so nice that you're making the visit to kind of see that. And I guess I want to ask you, too, how important it is, excuse me, as a former congressman from this district, you're familiar with this area, but as a senator now covering and representing the entire state, how important is it for you to visit all those different parts of the state that maybe you weren't able to visit as a congressman because that wasn't part of your district?
Well, Scott, I take my visits very seriously, as you know. It's important for me to visit with community leaders, with constituents, where they live. And so I really enjoy getting on the road and coming out to Farmington or headed out to Shiprock, like we will be a little bit later, or down south. I've taken the approach that I need to visit every one of the beautiful 33 counties that I'm honored to represent, and I've done that. I've done not just Zoom meetings, which we've become more and more familiar with, but also getting into those communities and into those counties, which is important. There's been a few counties where I've visited, and I still remember when we were down in Hobbs, New Mexico, and visiting with the leadership of Hobbs and Eunice and a few communities down that way. And they said, we've not seen anyone down here for some years, so it's good that you're back down here, Ben, and it's good that you're here as a United States Senator to visit about important needs. And I told him, absolutely, this won't be the first time you see me, it'll be the next. When we were down in Estancia, I think the council and the mayor were surprised to see us visit. But then once we started the conversation, we were able to get to work and talk about infrastructure and important needs. So I love traveling the state, whether we're down in the Boot Hill or we're out in the northeastern part of New Mexico and Roy or Mosquero. It's important to get out to these communities. And so I love it. So we're going to continue traveling and be on the road. And, we just can't say thanks enough to everyone for the incredible honor to serve as a United States Senator for the state of New Mexico.
Very good. Well, and I hope your schedulers have set a couple of days back in Nambe for you to be home at least for a little bit of time while you're here.
Well, it's always important for me to be at home in Nambe because those leaves keep coming off the trees and those weeds dry up and they need to be cut and those ditches need to be burned, as we know you need to clean them and take care of things. And those darn elms, those pesky little trees, I wish fruit trees grew like those elms did because I'm always out there pruning and cutting and trimming and doing all the rest. So that's my therapy. As a lot of my friends know, when my staff is saying, well, try to make time to go here, go there, or, not to take anything away from the incredible spas and places that we have in New Mexico where people from all over the country and the world come visit. But if you give me a shovel, a rake, a chainsaw, a little time on the Ranger, I'm going to be out on the farm at home doing some cleaning and getting my therapy and getting my son as well.
Very good. Famous movie said there's no place like home. I guess you agree.
No place like home, absolutely.
Yes, sir. So I was mentioning how calm you look in your visit because you're not running for anything at the moment. So you are not running for election this cycle, and so you are really just here as U.S. Senator and talking a little bit about some of the legislation and things that I know you'll be working on when you go back into session. There are some, I guess, must-pass bills that you'll be dealing with the entire Congress because we are faced with another potential shutdown if we don't, I guess. Is that the idea?
Absolutely correct, Scott. As we all know, the election is upon us in just about 2 weeks. And after that, when Congress returns to Washington, D.C., there are some important actions that have to take place, like funding the federal government, which should have been done a few weeks ago. But unfortunately, we're operating under something called a CR, a continuing resolution, which is a short-term funding for the federal government. So think of Social Security, Medicare, the Department of Defense, all of the federal agencies that are so very important, but especially those services that matter in our day-to-day lives. If the Congress does not act by December 20th, there will be yet again another government shutdown in front of us, which it wastes taxpayer money. It hurts communities. It puts people's lives at risk. And what I mean by that is those that are waiting for Medicare to make decisions, or IHS with Indian Health Services, things of that nature, that would have to shutter doors. It's so important to get that done. And the National Defense Authorization Act, such an important piece of legislation that provides so much funding for keeping America safe, but also to our veterans and to other important programs that matter to us here in New Mexico as well. So I'm looking forward to getting that National Defense Authorization Act adopted and sent to the President of the United States, and working with my colleagues to ensure that there will be funding for the federal government, and that will be done by December 20th. I think it's important not to push against that date, but Congress sometimes has a way of pushing against those deadlines. I just certainly hope that this is not one of those years, so that there's certainty for the American people going into the holiday season as well, especially those that depend on federal services and those that work for the federal government as well.
And do you think once the election is over, that seems to be sucking up all the air in the room these days, which I understand. It's an important election in many, many ways. But after November 5th, do you think that then both sides can come back to the table, I guess, to start negotiating some of these things to get something passed by December 20th?
Scott, I'm certainly hopeful. You know, I'm always optimistic about how Congress can work when people are willing to sit down and talk to one another. That was something that Senator Tom Udall shared with me is when I was first elected to the Senate. Tom said, look, you have a year to get to know all your colleagues, and you should try to do it in 6 months. There's only 99 others. So say hello, introduce yourself, try to grab a meal with them. Because even though you may disagree on a lot of issues, there's always going to be that one place that you have to work together. And I've been truly blessed with the relationships I've been able to create that make a difference for us here in New Mexico with Democratic and Republican colleagues, where we get to work on issues together. And some of those partnerships surprise some of my other colleagues. And I remind them, look, if you just get to know this person, sit down and chat with them, you're going to see that you may not agree on 90% of what you do, but there's 10% that you're going to find agreement on, and you can lean in on one another to be able to get good work done. So I'm certainly hopeful that when Congress gets back in November, those negotiations, which are currently ongoing, that they will solidify and we'll be able to get those done. And there's something else called the Farm Bill, which unfortunately has eluded Congress from getting this adopted and sent to the president. But that matters to us in all of our communities. And I certainly hope that not just the NDAA and the funding bill, but even the Farm Bill, that these are all packages that can get adopted and can get sent to the President of the United States, and done so in a bipartisan way.
Very good. Thank you for that. And I wanted to ask you too a little bit about the funding. When we talk about, of course, funding the federal government, there's a lot of folks that say, can we do something about these deficits? I know that's something that gets talked about a lot. They are big. They keep growing. And is there some serious conversations about deficit reduction?
There are a large group of members in the Senate, and I'm confident in the House as well, that we're having these conversations. Scott, you and I have talked about some policies that were put in the past. One of them was this simple policy, this really way of doing business. It was something called PAYGO. That was a set of rules that were established for the Congress, for the House and the Senate. And it's like we all do in our day-to-day lives. If you're going to pay for something, you have to pay for it immediately. And the only way to be able to pay for new legislation was to find a way where it would be funded. You have to pay for it either through new revenue, or you have to find a way to have additional savings in the federal government to be able to find a pay for. When this was done a few decades back, and I'm going to take you back to when a gentleman by the name of Bill Clinton was the president of the United States, the Congress was following these provisions. And we actually had the first projected surplus, if you can believe this, not a deficit, projected surplus for the United States government with a simple way of doing business, like the way that the American people do. Unfortunately, when the other party took over into Congress, they did away with that rule of the way Congress would do things, and then we saw these deficits start to grow. They were nowhere where they are today, but that's when they started to grow again. As opposed to having this $5 trillion surplus, we started to see these horrific numbers that are now before us. So there has to be a way, Scott, for this to happen, and all it takes is constraint. and being able to work together and bring back these rules that once existed. And we can see what happened at that time: projected surpluses, balanced budgets, as opposed to where things are today. So I'm hopeful that the conversations many of us are having and encouraging rules like that to be adopted within the Congress itself, that is a way forward where we know that it worked before, and I know that it can work again.
That seems like a million years ago when you talk about it that way, Senator, but you're right. Some of us are old enough to remember those budget surpluses. Didn't last very long, maybe 1 year, I think, but I do remember that. Yeah. Let me ask you a bit, too. You're here and visiting. Of course, when you're not here, you do have folks that work in your office to help constituents with a variety of needs, and some of those are fairly specific, right, those constituent services. What types of things can citizens come and talk to your representatives about if they're having difficulty with the federal government?
Well, Scott, I very much appreciate this question because constituent services matters to me. This is a priority of mine, and a priority where everyone in my office, every staff member, including myself, we all do constituent services. And it often surprises other U.S. Senate offices where there are maybe one or two staff members in the state of any senator who is doing some kind of casework. And I'm not aware of any staff in Washington, D.C. for most senators that do casework. This matters to me because this was, a tradition that was established in New Mexico by the former Congressman Manuel Lujan. This was something that was important to him. He did it well, and he was able to get everyone else to do it well. Heather Wilson, Bill Richardson, Pete Domenici, Jeff Bingaman, Senator Heinrich, myself, now with the colleagues that we serve with, Steve Pierce. And I've carried that torch. Not only is it an important tradition, but this is a place where you can make a difference in people's lives day to day that does not require a congressional action. What I mean by that is passing a piece of legislation on the floor out of one chamber, then the other, and then sending it to the president, and all the years that can go into that. You can make a positive difference in someone's life, in a small business's life, in a community's life, in one day or in just a few short days. And so the kind of work that we do is veterans, all that they were promised. And so many places where the federal government has let them down and just failed. Navigating the VA, for example, should not take a veteran reaching out to a member of the Senate or the House to be able to ask for help, but we need to do that today. And I've been honored to be able to work on behalf of so many veterans across New Mexico to make sure that they're getting those appointments, that they're getting their care, that they're getting their benefits, that those disability designations are taking place, even though they may have been denied. In the areas of Social Security or Medicare, navigating these programs when one denial after another could jeopardize someone from even getting an organ transplant. And we've had a case like that in New Mexico where a constituent is alive today because we were able to navigate through the red tape at Medicare and be able to get a procedure approved when someone was going to take a vacation on a Friday. The procedure is supposed to take place on a Monday. It's an organ transplant. So if you're not ready for this, it's going to go to someone else. And we were able to work to get that constituent, that organ transplant approved. But those are just a few areas, whether it's the post office, the IRS. There's an IRS tax advocate that is embedded in the IRS to help constituents. That's their only job. And so sometimes we have to help navigate those spaces as well. The Small Business Administration, SBDC, working with loans for small businesses as well. Some of the irrigation systems. I've been working out here with some of the communities where we've been fighting for years to get something funded. We finally did, and they're almost finished with that infrastructure for so many farmers here in San Juan County. But those are some of the areas where we can work together on behalf of constituents all across New Mexico when it comes to constituent services.
Very good. I imagine there's a lot of folks that maybe run up against some red tape or just seemingly a brick wall, and when they reach out to your office, somehow it's able to kind of get figured out, or you have folks on your staff that can help them navigate what they're dealing with.
It makes a difference, Scott, and what we'll generally do is we'll work with the constituent and we'll give them this privacy release form, which gives myself and my staff permission to advocate on their behalf. We won't make a decision for them, but we're able to help get through that red tape and get some answers where there may have been none before. And unfortunately, it's needed, but it's a honor and a privilege that I have to be able to work on behalf of constituents as well. And our office is good at this. As a matter of fact, my staff was recently invited to Washington, D.C. to train other offices across America with other Senate offices, Democrats and Republicans, to show them how we do this kind of casework and where we get success, and how it makes a difference in people's lives.
Very good. Well, I think it's important to remind our audiences about that service that your office provides here in Farmington, and also that of the Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez as well. I'm sure
Most certainly, absolutely.
She has it as well. Let me ask you a little bit about the election that is coming up, Senator, and you're not running, as I mentioned, but there are two candidates running for president and more, but two major party candidates. And so your thoughts about the election. It's been quite different from what we've seen before. Of course, the sitting president made a decision not to run for re-election kind of just this summer, a few months ago, and now his vice president is running against a former president. And so it's a very unique situation, as I'm sure you have talked about.
Most certainly. Well, Scott, just to start, I support Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to be the president and vice president of the United States. I've had the honor of working with both of them. Vice President Harris in her capacity as vice president, working with her as the chair of the subcommittee that oversees broadband deployment across America, spectrum allocation, important programs that we all depend on to make sure that we can have access to fast and affordable internet, and helping to make that work. That's just one example where I've been invited by the vice president to work with her, and I've seen her work, whether it's the compassion that I see that she leads with policy, or having to make tough decisions on behalf of policy that's good for all of America. And Tim Walz, I had the chance to serve with him in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he was the chair of the Veteran Affairs Committee. And it was Tim that led so many efforts to help veterans, especially at a time when we all were learning about these horrific burn pits in Afghanistan, where so many soldiers were having to burn trash and whatever they were trying to get rid of. And they would just put them into these open burn pits and they pour diesel on them. Well, so many veterans got sick because of that exposure of what they were inhaling, and there was no program to help them. And it was Tim Walz that led that effort in the U.S. House of Representatives to get something like that done. So for me, I think they're wonderful people. They're good people. They're people of character. They have strong morals as well, and I appreciate that. And here in New Mexico, the Albuquerque Journal, I think most of your listeners may have read that, recently released a poll that showed Vice President Harris up by about 9 points in New Mexico with just about 2 weeks left to the election. So it seems clear to me that Vice President Harris and Tim Walz will win and be successful in New Mexico. On the same note, Martin Heinrich, who's running for re-election for the U.S. Senate, he's doing very well, and he's earned a lot of support, and I expect to see his numbers near that range. And Teresa Ledger Fernandez continues to lead in the polls. So thank you to everyone for supporting Teresa. Melanie Stansberry seems to be strong in the polls in CD1. And Gabe Vasquez is leading by 4 to 8 points, depending on which poll you may have read, down in southern New Mexico. So it's intriguing for me to watch these numbers in New Mexico. And in the end, we still want to encourage everyone to get out and vote. It's important that you get out and you cast your vote for who you believe in, who you believe will be the strongest person to be the president and senator and House member and state representative and senator in New Mexico. So please get out and vote as well. And early voting has already begun, but please get out there and vote as well. But I'm optimistic with where I'm watching from, Scott, with what I'm seeing in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Ohio, and Arizona even, that Vice President Harris will become the next president of the United States.
All right. We'll see if that prediction holds, Senator Lujan.
Yes, sir.
It seems like New Mexico is no longer a swing state. It seems like we're fairly in the blue column.
Well, I get that question.
I don't want to take it for granted, but I guess
yes,
that's
sir.
what
Never
it seems.
take it for granted. And I get that question from national journalists, from cable news or from different outlets across America, as I do here at home. And I remind them that while New Mexico has a full federal Democratic delegation right now, and that we have all of our constitutional office holders are Democrats with majorities in the House and in the Senate, that does not happen by accident, and it's not easy. You have to fight every day for every vote to earn that trust from people all across New Mexico. And as Democratic candidates and as office holders now, we've been very fortunate and blessed to be able to earn that support from people in New Mexico. But as national committees are making decisions, I tell them, don't ignore New Mexico, because you see how Colorado and Nevada and Arizona are still very swingy states. Well, we're right in the middle of them. So don't forget about New Mexico, and you still need to invest out here to make sure people are learning about candidates and reminded to get out and vote.
Very good. Here, of course, in Farmington and San Juan County, it is not a blue county. It's a pretty red county. And so when you visit here, do you get an earful from folks when you meet them from the other party, or is everyone pretty polite? I hope they're polite.
Scott, I'm very blessed that no matter where I've traveled to in New Mexico, even in some of the most conservative counties in our state, people are always kind. They may share their mind with me, but it generally comes with a greeting and maybe even a blessing as well. And so whether I'm at the grocery store in the community where I live, where I'll give myself an extra 30 to 60 minutes to go pick up some eggs and some milk, because I'm probably going to visit some constituents when I'm there as well, it's important to share what's going on or what your concerns are as well. All that I ask is that we do it as respectfully as we can, because sometimes we've heard stories of where things can get ugly, and we're not like that in New Mexico. It's okay to disagree, and there's ways that you can do it where you're able to make a point, and who knows, some conversation that I may be having with someone where my position may be based on a set of facts that I've learned, you're going to share something new with me, and I'm going to look at it and say, I better go back and check what Donnie just told me at the grocery store, what Alice said after church, and see if I can learn a little bit more. And I'll give you one example, Scott. You know that about 2 years ago, I survived a stroke. It was a very, very tough time for me. But there was a traveling nurse by the name of Tyler that was one of my nurses. And I was very concerned about the policies surrounding traveling nurses, because in New Mexico, we have a shortage of nurses, like we do in most parts of America. And there was a policy that would encourage nurses to travel around the country as well. And so I was very cautious about that policy, because I did not want to lose nurses from New Mexico to other parts of America. Well, I learned from Tyler the importance of these traveling nurses. While New Mexico had a shortage, we had a shortage in neurology, which is the department that I was in when I had my stroke. And if it was not for Tyler, I may not have had a healthcare provider helping me, or helping all of the others that were in the wing where I was, where there were other stroke patients that were there. And he talked to me about that important policy and a few others, and it changed my perspective on the issue. Having learned from him and talked to him and his wife, who are two traveling nurses, they're back in Florida now, but I learned so much from him. And I've gone back and I've supported traveling nursing now, and I'm able to explain why. And so that's just one example where these conversations, you never know where they can go. And I'm smart enough to know I don't know everything, but I have some of the most intelligent, prepared constituents in the country. And so I invite them, come on over and let's chat about whatever may be on your mind.
Well, and we're so grateful about your recovery too, Senator Lujan.
Thank God, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here, and talking about that experience and what you learned from it too. I'm sure, which is a lot. You talked about the language of politics a little bit. I want to ask you maybe about some of the national dialogue and maybe trying to get some of the civility back into politics. I don't know what else you can say about it, but it certainly is a little discouraging sometimes to hear some of the rhetoric from both sides on occasion when we're talking about the national campaigns. Does that bother you as well?
It does bother me, and there is rhetoric from both sides. It goes back to that lesson that I learned from Tom Udall, which is get to know all your colleagues. Because in the Senate, the only way that you can be successful in passing policy is if you have the support from your colleagues, even those that vote no. Even those that vote against you, there's other privileges that they have that they can really muck up policy and prevent it from even being considered for a vote as well. So one, I'm blessed by that. And then two, I also remember the old adage from a former governor of the state of New Mexico, Bruce King, who was he raised cattle for a living. He was a cattle rancher. And Bruce would always remind us that when you were at an impasse, sometimes you had to put everyone in the barn and lock it up and not let them out until they came up with a solution. Look, growing up on that little farm that I still call home, where I learned from my grandfather, who was a sheep herder, my dad's dad, and my grandma, and my dad even, when we were out there cleaning barns, and everyone that cleans barns knows it's not the first layer that builds character, it's the second one when it gets really ripe. You have to do it all. And when a neighbor needed help, you didn't say, oh, well, Dad, are they a Democrat or are they a Republican? Who did they vote for in the last election? If they needed help, you went and helped them. If they had a hole in the roof, you went and helped them. If they needed a tire change, you went and helped them. Whatever it was. And there's a certain upbringing, I think, that we get here in New Mexico that has helped me in Congress and has helped me be more successful in the U.S. Senate. There were some recent ratings that came out, Scott. I wasn't aware about them. It came out from the Lujan Institute, where they look at how bipartisan members of Congress are, the House and in the Senate. And I was surprised to see where I was. It wasn't the strongest score, but I was 36 out of 100. And I was, I think, the most bipartisan of the New Mexico delegation, which is something I'm very proud of. But that's what it takes to get legislation adopted and to fight and work for your constituents. So it can come back, but people have to be willing to get together. And then where the rhetoric is on both sides, you got to tone it down a little bit as well, because in the end we have to work together, and we're here to represent the people of the United States of America. I mean, what an incredible honor to be able to fight and defend our Constitution, on our democracy, and it's the people that entrust you to be in those positions. We should show them the respect that they deserve as well, and we should get the job done instead of bickering all the time. So I appreciate that, Scott.
You bet. And of course, there's a divided Congress, and so one party cannot really do it all, and there's a very thin majority in the U.S. Senate, of course, and so you really do need to have some input from the other side in order to get things done.
On any given day, it turns out you need more votes than the other side to be able to pass a piece of legislation in the Congress. And I've been very proud that a lot of what I've been able to get adopted out of the Senate has come with bipartisan support and bipartisan votes. And that's not accidental. You have to get to know each other, talk to each other. I still remember going to visit with Senator Mitt Romney on an issue that mattered to me here in New Mexico and on the Navajo Nation. And I just showed up to his office and knocked on the door and sat in the lobby and waited my turn to be able to chat with him. And he was surprised that I did that. And in the end, we were able to earn his support. But sometimes it takes that humility, I think, where for me, it's just day to day. It's how I do things. But others describe it as being humble or humility to be able to go and do that and knock with folks. But Senator Romney was someone that appreciated that. And that just goes to show, if you're willing to take a moment, take some time and talk to someone, you can earn their support.
Very good. I want to ask you, in the minutes we have remaining this morning, Senator Lujan, a little bit about some projects that are being discussed here in northwest New Mexico. One is the freight rail project that I think you're a little bit familiar with, and that is to have some kind of freight rail spur from the I-40 corridor up into this part of New Mexico. We're one of the very few areas of the continental U.S. without rail service, and it would be a regional project. How do you feel about an investment? It's expensive, and certainly there's a lot of planning that needs to go into it. It's not going to happen overnight, but is that something that deserves your attention and the attention of other folks in Congress?
As you said, Scott, it's an expensive project, but a lot of significant infrastructure is expensive. Think about the pipeline that we've all been working on to be able to get water to the Navajo Nation and to the Hickory Apache Nation as well. It takes significant investment. So while we have to always look at the details of a particular project, but I've said before, and I'll say today, that that project deserves to be looked at on its merits, to be able to create economic opportunity, to be able to create safer ways of moving product, and opening up more corridors. It makes absolute sense. Whether it's into the Four Corners with oil and gas, or it's into NAPI, there's benefits all around from an ag perspective, or from an oil and gas perspective as well. And it's also going to create safer commutes, fewer 18-wheelers as well on the paved roads. That means that fewer potholes for the rest of us as well. So you're not having to get your car aligned maybe just as much, or things of that nature. So on the surface, the merits sound great to me, but you always have to look at those details with locating it, approvals, support from the counties, support from the towns, the communities, the people, the Navajo Nation. How can we all work together? And the last I heard about this project, there's broad support for it already. So the planning is currently underway.
That's true, and there's a significant planning grant from the federal government that is helping to make that that happen as well. Final question, I think, is all we have time for, Senator, and that is about the energy transition that we're seeing in this part of the country. As you mentioned, certainly traditionally the oil and gas economy, excuse me, that's switching over now that we're seeing more solar installations in this area. Of course, one of our coal-fired power plants has been decommissioned and just recently kind of torn down. Is that an important change to see on the horizon? I guess what's the future look like for energy production from this part of the state?
Well, I've always said that we need to be thoughtful about how we're producing energy in America. There's places that it makes sense, and there's places that it doesn't. And what we've seen even under the Biden administration here in New Mexico is oil and gas generation is at an all-time high. I think it's even double than what it was from 2019. So the same time of year, if you will, under President Trump to President Biden, I think it's double from 19 to where we are today. And with that being said, it's happening at a time where there's an administration that is also saying we should deploy more wind, more solar. We should be able to deploy more charging stations, for example. I still remember learning and chatting with the Sandell family about what could be done with retrofitting vehicles with natural gas as well, given the abundance here in the community and with fleets. That's something that should be considered and talked about with the community because of its proximity. So I'm hopeful that going forward, we'll be smarter about the way that we're looking at electron generation, moving people. But even with power, Scott, there's not enough conversation taking place about power lines. And that might surprise a lot of folks that I'm talking about this. But with transmission, Scott, you may remember that I was a former public regulation commissioner, which is the equivalent of public utility commissions across the country. And whenever these expensive rate cases would come before the commission where the 5-member body, now a 3-member body, makes a decision about the rates that utilities are going to charge their customers, all of us, that for electricity cases, you put a 5% buffer right off the top because of something called line loss. Just because of physics and from the length from point A to point B on these lines, you lose 5% of the electrons being generated. So why isn't there more conversation about better connectivity on these transmission corridors where maybe you drop that from 5 to 3? That means that we're going to not see our rates go up by maybe that additional 2%, or you could drive infrastructure in that space. So we should be talking about this in more robust ways. But New Mexico is going to be at the forefront because we're an energy state. We always have been and we always will be.
All right, very good. Well, Senator Ben Ray Lujan, it's always a pleasure to visit with you when you take time for us, when you visit Farmington. Thank you for stopping by. Appreciate you very much.
Always an honor, Scott. Thanks again for having me in the studio today.
You bet. Thank you. That's Senator Ben Ray Lujan, Senator from New Mexico, my guest here on KSJE. KSJE and the San Juan College Native American Center present the Student Study Tip of the Week.
Hello and good day. My name is Demetrius. This is your study tip of the week. Studying without distractions is crucial. If you're studying alone, try to find a quiet space or put headphones in to block out noise from your surroundings. If you're in an area trying to study and it's just not working out, relocate. It might be frustrating to have to pick up and move, but it will be worth it once you're in a good environment. Consider putting your phone on silent or vibrate too. You can always respond to your messages after your study session.
The Student Study Tip of the Week is presented by the San Juan College Native American Center and KSJE.